I was sitting in my own backyard, wearing the dress my daughter-in-law had just smirked at and called cheap. The table went dead silent. My son didn't say a word. I didn't argue. I didn't explain myself. I simply set my spoon down, looked her straight in the eye, and said one thing. In that moment, she finally realized whose house she was actually living in. I've never understood why some people think being loud can make up for a total lack of class. That afternoon, I was sitting in my own garden, the one my late husband Arthur and I had spent 30 years tending. My daughter-in-law, Chloe, had decided to host her birthday party there in my home. She had swapped out my linens, replaced my vintage china with some trendy, sharp-edged modern set, and invited a crowd of people I'd never laid eyes on in my life. My son Julian sat next to her, staring at his phone like he was just a guest passing through. I was wearing my green linen dress. I've had it for years. It's well-tailored, clean, and timeless. But to Chloe, it was apparently an eyesore. When one of her friends looked me up and down with a condescending smirk, Chloe saw her opening. "Oh, that dress is just from a generic department store," she said loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. The clinking of silverware stopped. The silence felt as heavy as the pound cake on the plates. I saw Julian look up for a split second, but he immediately looked away. He didn't say a thing. Not a word. I set my fork down slowly. I didn't feel angry, just a deep, cold sense of clarity. Chloe was trying to rewrite the hierarchy of this house. She wanted to show everyone that I was just a piece of furniture in her new life. I looked her right in the eyes without blinking. The 5 words I spoke were perfectly calm. "And I own the house." The silence bottomed out. Chloe opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The guests suddenly found their coffee cups very interesting. It wasn't a fight. It was a statement of fact. The entire atmosphere shifted instantly. Julian cleared his throat nervously, but I just calmly poured myself another cup of coffee. The afternoon was far from over, but the rules had just changed. After the guests left, an icy silence settled over the house. Chloe made a point of slamming dishes in the kitchen. Normally, I would have helped her, but today I stayed in the living room and read the paper. Julian wandered in, fidgeting the way he used to as a little boy when he'd broken a window. "Mom, that was a little harsh earlier. Don't you think Chloe didn't mean it like that?" He started. He wouldn't look at me. He was busy studying the hardwood floors I'd hand-waxed just last week. I put the paper down. "It's not about the dress, Julian. It's about respect. If she's so embarrassed by my taste, maybe she shouldn't be living in the house that reflects it." I spoke without any bitterness, almost matter-of-factly. The next morning I found that Chloe had moved my coffee maker to the basement and replaced it with an expensive pod machine. It was a small act of aggression, a way of marking her territory. She wanted to show she controlled the daily routine. In the past, I would have sighed and let it go just to keep the peace. Not this time. I didn't go get my old machine. Instead, I went to the mailbox. The property tax bill and the utilities for the whole house had arrived. Up until now, I had paid for everything: taxes, insurance, heating. Julian and Chloe lived in the upstairs suite rent-free while I stayed downstairs. It had been an arrangement of convenience, not necessity. I walked into the kitchen where Chloe was sipping her expensive coffee. I laid the bill on the table. "Here is the breakdown for the upstairs portion for the next quarter," I said pleasantly. "I've decided to restructure my finances." Chloe stared at the paper. The amount wasn't small. "But we agreed we were saving up so we could—" "You are saving," I interrupted gently. "I am no longer subsidizing." I saw her jaw set. It was the first step in taking my house back. The reaction to the financial demand didn't take long. Chloe went for the cold shoulder. She stopped saying hello in the hallway, and Julian looked more stressed by the day. He was caught between a rock and a hard place, but he was old enough to make his own choices. I hadn't raised him to be passive. He'd chosen that himself. One afternoon, I came home from grocery shopping and tried to go through the connecting door from the main hall to my apartment. The key stuck. No, it didn't stick. It didn't fit. Chloe had changed the lock on the interior door. I thought we needed more privacy. She called down from the landing when she heard me rattling the knob. "It's better if we have separate spaces, Mom." It was a blatant provocation. She wanted to lock me out of my own hallway just because she knew I had the master key to the whole house. But she forgot one thing: I was the only name on the deed. I didn't scream. I went to the hardware store. The next morning, while they were both at work, I had a locksmith come over. I didn't just have the interior lock reverted. I changed the locks on the front door of the house. When Julian and Chloe came home that evening, they found themselves standing on the porch. I heard the doorbell, but I took my time. I was finishing up some paperwork. Only after the third ring did I open the door. "The key won't work," Chloe blurted out, visibly frazzled. "That's right," I said calmly. "Since we're prioritizing privacy now, I've upgraded the security. Julian here is your new key. You're my son." I handed him a single key. Then I looked at Chloe. "You don't get one. I'm sure Julian will be happy to let you in whenever you arrive." That's what privacy is all about, right? Chloe's face turned bright red. She realized instantly that she was now entirely dependent on Julian's presence just to get inside. The power balance had shifted, but the Cold War was just entering the next phase. Chloe started trying to turn Julian against me. I often heard their muffled, angry voices coming from upstairs. Julian looked exhausted. He was trying to please two women at once, which is a losing game. On Sundays, it was tradition for us to eat together. Usually, I cooked for everyone. But this Sunday, the stove stayed off. I had picked up a small prime rib from the local butcher, just enough for one. When Julian and Chloe walked into the kitchen at 1 p.m. sharp, they expected the usual smells of a home-cooked meal. Instead, I was sitting at my small kitchen table halfway through my dinner. "Is there no food?" Julian asked, confused. "Oh, I'm eating," I replied, taking a bite. "Since you're managing your own finances now and we're keeping separate households, I assumed Chloe would be cooking for you. She places such a high value on modern standards, after all." Chloe stared at my plate. She couldn't cook a lick. She had relied on my home cooking for years, while simultaneously making snide comments about my old-fashioned recipes. "You can't do this, Mom," Julian said quietly. "Actually, I can," I said firmly. "I am not your housekeeper. I am a retired woman who wants to enjoy her life. If you want to live here like it's an apartment, you have to act like tenants. Tenants cook for themselves." Chloe turned around without a word and stormed upstairs. Julian lingered for a second. He looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw a spark of respect in his eyes. He was finally realizing that his sweet old mother wasn't going to be a doormat anymore. "I'm sorry, Julian," I said softly, "but you have to decide if you're a husband or a house guest." That night, they ordered pizza. The smell filled the stairwell, but it didn't bother me one bit. The garden was my sanctuary. Chloe had started reimagining it. Without asking, she had hacked back my favorite rose bushes, claiming she needed room for a modern lounge area. When I saw the mangled plants, I knew talking was useless. I watched her through the window as she proudly unpacked new patio furniture, ugly gray plastic pieces that looked hideous against the old brick of the house. She put them right where my favorite bench used to be. On Monday, while she was at her office, I called a landscaper, but not to move the furniture. I had a simple, sturdy wooden fence installed right through the middle of the yard, exactly along the legal line that separated my private patio from the portion of the yard they were permitted to use. When Chloe got home, she couldn't believe her eyes. Her lounge area was boxed in by a fence, and her access to my roses was completely cut off. "What is this? This looks terrible!" she yelled over the fence. I stood on my side, watering the roses. "It defines our responsibilities, Chloe. On your side, you can put up as much plastic as you want. My side stays exactly as it is. And the roses. They need a break from people who don't understand them." I saw her kick the fence in a rage. Julian stood on the balcony, watching in silence. He didn't intervene. He knew I was within my rights. The garden was my property, and her use of it was a privilege, not a right. That evening, it was quiet. Chloe seemed to finally grasp that every act of aggression on her part would result in an immediate physical consequence. I had stopped arguing. I just acted. It was liberating. For the first time in a long time, I felt like the mistress of my own home. But I knew Chloe hadn't given up yet. Julian came downstairs 2 days later. He looked incredibly nervous. "Mom, Chloe wants to move out. She says she can't take it anymore. She wants us to find our own place." I set my book aside. "That's your right, Julian. If she's unhappy here, you should go." Julian swallowed hard. "But we can't afford anything even close to this in this neighborhood. Rents are astronomical. And we just bought that new car. That's the problem with keeping up appearances, isn't it?" I said calmly. "Spending money, you don't have to impress people you don't like. And in the end, you don't have enough for what matters." I saw Julian struggling. Chloe had given him an ultimatum. Either they move or he had to get me to relax the rules, which meant going back to paying for everything and giving up my rights. "Mom, can't you just give in for once, just for the sake of the family?" he pleaded. I looked at him for a long time. "Julian, family peace doesn't mean one person swallows everything so the other can act like a tyrant. If you want to go with her, go. I won't stop you. But don't expect me to sacrifice my life so Chloe can make fun of my clothes." I handed him an envelope. Inside was a list of available rentals in town that I had looked up that morning. They were all small, functional, and in a price range they could afford if they sold the expensive car. "Here are your options," I said. "Choose your life, Julian. But choose it as a man." He took the envelope with shaking hands. I knew this was the turning point. It was his move, not mine. I had drawn my line in the sand. On Saturday morning, I heard heavy thumping from upstairs. Chloe was barking orders. Julian was lugging suitcases. They had made their choice. Or rather, Chloe had made the choice, and Julian was following her as he always did. I stood in the kitchen making tea. I didn't go out to help. I didn't want a dramatic goodbye. When there was a knock at my door, Julian was standing there. He looked miserable. "We're leaving," he said. "Chloe's waiting in the car." "I wish you the best of luck with the new place," I said sincerely. "Give me a call once you've settled in. No accusations, no tears." He almost seemed disappointed that I wasn't begging him to stay. But he needed to understand that love doesn't mean letting yourself be used. "Mom, why did you get so hard?" he asked quietly. I took a step toward him. "I didn't get hard, Julian. I just finally became myself again. I spent years playing a role to keep you both happy. But when someone treats you with zero respect, you have to close the door before you lose yourself." He nodded, slowly gave me a quick peck on the cheek, and left. I heard the car engine rev as they drove away. Then there was silence. A silence I hadn't experienced so deeply since Arthur passed away. I walked through the house. It was empty. But it didn't feel lonely. It felt clean. I went upstairs to the guest suite. Chloe had left a mess. Trash everywhere. She'd even intentionally spilled yogurt on the carpet. One last petty act of revenge. I grabbed the vacuum and a scrub bucket. As I cleaned up the mess, I felt an incredible sense of relief. Every stain I removed felt like a weight lifting off my soul. I was alone again, and I was free. The first few weeks alone were wonderful. I repurposed the upstairs suite not as a living space, but as a studio for my painting and a guest room for old friends. I took down the fence in the garden not because I was giving in, but because I didn't need it anymore. The whole garden was mine again. I bought myself a new dress. Another linen one, simple but in a vibrant sapphire blue. I wore it with pride. Julian called once a week. His voice sounded strained. He talked about the small apartment, the noisy neighbors, and how Chloe was miserable because she had to do everything herself now, the cleaning, the cooking, the laundry. Money was tight, and the fancy car had already been traded in for a used sedan. I listened, but I didn't offer advice. I didn't offer money. Instead, I told him about my garden, the birds, and the new painting I was working on. I wanted him to see that my happiness didn't depend on his obedience. One day, he showed up at the door unannounced. He looked pale. "Mom, can I come in?" I invited him in, but I didn't take him to the kitchen. We went to the living room. I offered him tea, not a roast dinner. Chloe and I, all we do is fight, he confessed. She blames me for not making enough money. She says it's your fault we're stuck in that hole of an apartment. I looked at him calmly. It's always easy to blame others, Julian. But you're both adults. You set your priorities. If Chloe measures a person's worth by their bank account or their dress, she'll never be happy. I miss it here, he whispered. You miss the convenience, Julian, not the home. I corrected him gently. It was a tough conversation, but a necessary one. Months passed. It was autumn now, and the leaves on the old oak tree in the yard were turning gold. One afternoon, a car pulled up. It wasn't Julian's, it was Chloe. She got out and stood by the gate for a moment. She looked different, less polished. Her hair wasn't perfectly styled. She actually looked a little unsure of herself. I opened the door before she could even ring the bell. "Martha," she said. It was the first time she'd used my first name without that mocking undertone. "Do you have a minute to talk?" I stepped aside and let her in. We sat in the kitchen. The old coffee maker hummed quietly in the background. "I wanted to apologize." She started looking down at her hands. "Not just for the comment about the dress, for everything. I was arrogant. I thought I could just steamroll over everything without appreciating what was already here." I stayed silent and let her finish. I knew this wasn't some magical transformation driven by love. It was the hard reality of daily life that had worn her down. But it was a start. "Julian is miserable," she continued. "And so am I. We got caught up in things that don't actually matter." "That's a big realization, Chloe," I said quietly. "But what are you expecting from me?" She looked up at me. "Can we start over? Not like before, with real rules. We'd pay rent, actual rent, and we would respect your boundaries." I leaned back. I could tell she meant it, but I wasn't ready to give up my freedom just yet. "I've converted the upstairs," I said. "It's no longer a full apartment. If you want to come back, it's strictly on my terms. A lease agreement, separate households, and absolute mutual respect. No comments about my life, my clothes, or how I run this house." She nodded slowly. I accept that. It took a few more weeks to get the move organized. This time, there were no golden promises, just a written lease that all three of us signed. Julian looked relieved, but also more mature. He helped carry boxes without complaining. Chloe kept to herself. She asked before she changed anything in the garden. Every now and then, she'd bring over flowers without expecting anything in return. And me, I stayed observant, but relaxed. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, we were back in the garden. This time, Chloe had set the table using my old vintage china, which she had carefully taken out of the hutch. She had even baked a cake. It wasn't perfect. The edges were a little burnt, but it was homemade. Julian sat there watching us. He finally looked content again. I was wearing my green linen dress. Chloe looked at me, gave a small smile, and said, "That green really looks good on you, Martha. It matches the roses." It wasn't over-the-top praise, but it was honest. It was an acknowledgement of who I was. I took a sip of my coffee and looked out over my garden. I hadn't lost my house. I had reclaimed it. I hadn't lost my son. I had helped him grow up. And I had gained a daughter-in-law who finally understood that respect was the only currency that really mattered in this home. I was a woman in my 60s, wearing a dress from a generic store, living in an old house. But I was the master of my own life. As the sun began to dip behind the trees, I felt a deep, lasting sense of peace. The boundaries were clear, the house was quiet, and the future belonged to me. It didn't take lawyers or big dramas. It just took a few clear words and the courage to stand my ground. Life was back to normal, perfectly ordinary and absolutely priceless. The loudest person doesn't win. Sometimes, all it takes is standing firmly in your place and the rest of the world goes quiet on its own.